Hello, everyone. This is James Ramsey from the Create team. We've also, I think Dow was on here as well. The slides are linked in the Google Doc, which I'll quickly paste in the chat channel. And Francis has already put a few questions in there, which I've answered asynchronously. The first one was about Giddily HA. I think a lot of people are interested in this, although Giddily is technically its own group and not part of the Create group. It is part of the Create stage, so can understand the confusion. And a side note before I answer the question directly is take a look at the slides, and that has an excerpt from the categories page. And so if you have questions, what's in the Create stage of the DevOps lifecycle versus the Create group, the slides will answer that and also explain that there will soon be no longer a Create group. So the Create stage will be different. So there are 5 groups within the Create stage: source code, which is repositories and merge requests. There is knowledge, which is design management and wikis. There is editor, which includes the web IDE, live coding, snippets, and search. And then there is the Giddily group, and then there is the Gitter group. So that's a long preamble to answer the question about the Giddily group. We are working on HA. We're currently working on the beta of high availability, which is working on a naive implementation of eventual consistency for replication. Once we have that in place and we can start testing it, then we'll be able to refine our estimates for when we might have a generally available version that a customer could actually use for high availability purposes. Currently, we're aiming to have a GA version of HA in some form by the end of the year, but there's a high degree of uncertainty around that estimate because it is quite a complicated project. You can see the different stages of the how we're planning on tackling that problem in the epic that I've linked. I'll jump down to the Gitter question. Gitter also a different group, but Gitter is kind of a separate product, and I happen to also be the interim product manager for Gitter. It's not part of the self-hosted installation of GitLab because it is kind of a separate product. It's really a SaaS product at the moment where you go to gitter.io or gitterim.io. I can't remember the URL. It auto-completes in my browser. But yeah, it's a community building product, and we're trying to improve it and increase the integration with GitLab. But it's got kind of a different direction at the moment in terms of just improving it, retaining the customers that we've got. And I think ultimately in the coming months and probably next year, realistically, we'll start to really build deeper and deeper and more interesting things with Gitter into GitLab. There's interesting opportunities that we can explore in the future around using it as a way to escalate conversations from asynchronous to synchronous channels. So say if there's an incident or an outage, we could use that as an instant messaging solution to sort of progressively escalate into increasingly real-time forms of communication and then move back down. So it's still, I guess, early days for what we're doing with that. But yeah, probably not part of the pitch for how we sell GitLab. Francis again, live coding, the new category of GitLab. I'm really excited about this category. There's a lot of opportunity for what we can do with it. I think pair programming is kind of the obvious one in terms of remote code reviews or extreme programming in organizations. But I think you're right. There's going to be a lot of interesting applications internally for hopefully replacing Google Docs and moving all our meeting notes into Git version control. I would love that. I'd love to be taking notes in Markdown in actual text files rather than this weird Google Docs format. I know that there's a lot of people internally at GitLab that probably feel the same. I think Kai is the product manager for the editor team, editor group, which will be working on this later in the year. So if you want to leave some comments on the epic, I think we'd love to start some discussion. We still haven't worked out how to start tackling the problem yet, but hopefully we'll get there. Sid, maybe I should ask people to verbalize their questions. That's a great idea. Kenny, would you like to verbalize your next question?
Sure, I'd love to, James. Yeah, so I had asked this in the channel late last night, actually, but I was wondering, I'd come across that we show language percentages in the repository, but I was looking at the repository API, and that's not easily queryable, so that an administrator could say, of all my projects, what's the combined percentage, or how many projects do I have of various languages? And so that way I gave an answer, but I just wanted to verbalize that. That seems cool. The more we can display to administrators about the metadata of the projects in large instances, seems like it's a valuable kind of dashboard thing for enterprise customers.
Absolutely, and if there's things that we're not currently tracking in the database in a queryable way, let us know what you'd like us to track, and we can probably make that work. Right now, we're only tracking things where we kind of need to for caching purposes or just expensiveness of calculation, which is why we have the programming language stuff in the database. Otherwise, we generally just prefer to either get it from the repo directly or to cache it in Redis to save some of these calls. But then the purpose isn't necessarily to allow querying, so it's not in the database yet. But we can change that if it's data that you think would be useful to present in a dashboard fashion.
Thanks.
Simon, looks like you've got a question.
Yeah, so it's just a follow-up to it. So if we can expose the different percentages of languages, can we also surface the language versions? So if someone, for example, wants to know if there's an out-of-date version of Java in their setup, can we surface that information for them as well?
Sorry, I missed the question there. You're asking about specific versions of languages people are using?
Correct.
I mean, in some cases, you can get that information from files in the repository, like .ruby version or whatever. But we're not currently tracking that. No, we're going off heuristics like the file name extension, and we're going off things like bash files that might have a a hash bang at the top, which indicates what language they're written in. It's not smart enough yet to look at hints for what version it might be. No.
Cool. Thank you.
Sid, would you like to verbalize your question?
Sure. We had an I/O regression in Gitaly. I see a lot of great work being done to resolve that. Will that be fixed for all versions of GitLab? Like, for example, the NFS detection and then using Rugged. Will when that works, will we ship it out? Will we backport it?
Yes, I think as you point out, the first step is to detect if NFS is being used. And I think the plan for how we implement that and the detection method that was proposed, it should be possible to backport that to previous versions in the same way that we backported the rugged patches. And hopefully, I think we can make that a non-breaking change and safely enable that in a patch release.
Great. I also have the next question. For the wiki, do you want to kind of enable all features of Golem? I think that's that was a thing I remember. Is that on the roadmap, or are you looking at other things?
There are a lot of different features in Golem. I don't know that. I think we need to actually review each feature before we enable it, because I think there's possible issues in how they work, and I know that GitHub also hasn't enabled them all. So we should probably do a review and understand what they are and the way they behave. They may introduce security issues. There may be other problems. I think there are some specific ones that we should look at implementing. But in terms of general prioritization, I think the wiki has been relatively low on the priority list. We've been mostly fixing performance issues and nasty bugs in the wiki. I think hopefully we will be able to find more capacity in the future, but I don't have a firm timeline on that. And I think Kai, as he sort of picks up that area, will be looking to prioritize and review the backlog of the wiki. But it is something that probably has been neglected more than it should have been.
For sure. Thanks for that. I also have the next one. We have the web IDE, and I was super wrong about this because I told you like, oh, well, Monaco working on iOS. We'll just wait for Microsoft to fix that. But I tried it. It's a horrible experience. It's basically unusable right now. Do you think how hard would it be to fix some very annoying things on iOS where like your cursor strokes don't come true and things like that?
Fixing the arrow keys is almost impossible. If you go to any, from the keyboard events, if you go to any other editor project online that has like a web interface, there are people complaining about this. And the reason is that the key press events from the keyboard that get reported to the operating system don't get forwarded into the browser. And so there's no JavaScript event to handle. It's got no information on the JavaScript event. It's just an empty key press event. So I've gone into like a code pen and looked at this, completely empty. So arrow keys are never going to work until Apple fixes that, or we build a native version of the IDE. So we'd have to go.
No, let's not go. Let's not go there. Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And also, like, I made a few edits even without the arrow keys, and like after 3 edits, it kind of the editor became janky, had to reload.
Yeah. So apparently VS Code Online, I haven't had a chance to check it out, but I was chatting to Sven from Thea the other day, and apparently they've done a bunch of work to make VS Code Online work on tablets, and they market it as such. And it's also built on top of Monaco. So it's likely that they have fixed some of those issues themselves. So it'll be interesting to see if they come through into Monaco, or we can investigate and look at the source code in the inspector and see what they've done to maybe resolve that. So that's possible.
Yeah, keep me posted, and it's okay to politely ask Microsoft, and it's okay to let me know if Microsoft politely declines that.
I think we should follow up on them now that and test VS Code Online on an iPad and compare it to our IDE and see exactly what the differences are. I know that the Thea project is planning to do the same because they've got the same frustration because they're also built on Monaco and it just doesn't work on an iPad.
Yeah, that's great. Keep me posted. What's next for Gitter?
Currently, we're working on threading of messages, which is one of the most requested features in Gitter. And in parallel, we've been working on, or the managed team's been helping enabling Project Badge to link to a Gitter room whenever you create a new project. So it's really easy to enable a Gitter connection. And then after threading, we'll continue to work on improving the native integration between GitLab and Gitter so that there's better rooms and issue linking, kind of like there is for GitHub, where you can link to merge requests and issues and you get nice unfurled links.
Great, thanks. We're enabling Elasticsearch now finally for GitLab org. So the group, so very, very small part of GitLab.com. What's maybe Dawa wants to talk about the approach, how we're going to make sure that everyone on GitLab.com gets good searching, which we owe them.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, of course, getting Elasticsearch up and running for every project in GitLab.com is the goal. But there's one really big hurdle in our way, which is just the sheer index size of indexing all of these repositories. Right now, if we index all of the Git repositories, the total size of the index would be about 60% of the total size of the bare repositories themselves. So if we were to enable an Elasticsearch and create all of these indexes, we would certainly get a much, much higher data usage bill, or rather storage usage bill. But that is that epic number 3, which is linked from the slides as well, where we are looking into ways of reducing that size. When we get there, we will also need to figure out how are we going to shard this efficiently, effectively. One of the things that Sid proposed a little while ago is to do this on a per group basis, which is one of the options being considered, but some concerns have also been raised there. And then there's another issue that talks about the general problem of sharding being badly distributed, highly skewed in its distribution. So per group is one thing we're considering, but more discussion there will take place. But our first kind of goals on the Elasticsearch topic are getting this MVC up on the GitLab.com with only the GitLab org group and GitLab.com group as well, if we can make that work. And then next up, improving the admin controls, because a lot of our customers who are using Elasticsearch have been telling us that their experience isn't so great because we haven't been dogfooding it. So once we start dogfooding it on GitLab.com, we can focus more on actually getting those admin controls into a place where they can be used to manage an Elasticsearch installation and get the GitLab integration of this scale. And then the next step is, once those tools are in place and once the customer experience is better, is to kind of keep focusing on getting this rolled out for all of GitLab.com. But there's still some discussions there on that road.
And if you say 60% of the size of the Git repositories, is that with or without any redundancy in Elasticsearch?
That is without any redundancy. That's just a bare index everything, have one single index, and no amount of HA, no amount of redundancy. That's correct. So we need to do a lot of work before we can make that viable.
Cool. My uninformed opinion that you can ignore, but I've heard a lot of other founders that have massive problems when they try to scale Elasticsearch to big sizes. And they tend to have like teams of people to take care of that. So having kind of treating it more like Gitly, where you just have multiple servers that mind their own business, might be a way to avoid that, because Elasticsearch is great as long as the index size is not overly broad. And I think there's going to be very few people doing global searches on GitLab.com because we're not hosting a ton of open source.
That is true, although of course that might change, and we also have customers, of course, who want to at least do these kinds of searches on their own complete instance, and we have customers with very large data sets as well. So we'll need to figure it out. And even on .com, to dogfood is at scale, we might actually need Elasticsearch experts on board to manage that thing at some point.
That makes sense. I think we should start hiring for Elasticsearch experts anyway, because we'll need that anyway. Consider a bit the difference between the write and the read load. I think right now we're super read heavy. So even if we have multiple shards, we can just send the query to all the different shards. That will increase the read load, but Elasticsearch is really good at dealing with the read load. I think for us, the write load is always going to be the problem. The building of the index is the problem. So you can kind of optimize that by just sending multiple reads for one query.
That sounds reasonable. If you don't mind, I'll jump to Dylan's sub-question on yours. Have we considered allowing people to configure a URL to their own Elasticsearch? We do actually allow that. It doesn't need to be an Elasticsearch bundled with Omnibus or anything. You can have your own Elasticsearch cluster set up somewhere. People can now, you're saying actually on a GitLab.com level, I'm assuming, Dylan. Yeah, for self-hosted, we allow this already.
On GitLab.com, if I care about indexing and I want to bring my own Elasticsearch index, I can pay for that and have search be as fast as I want and unaffected by other users.
I don't think that has been requested, or it's something we have considered. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. James, what are your thoughts?
That's pretty interesting. I don't know technically how the integration points work for that, so I don't know if that's
we should go there. Come on, people. We should just make sure GitLab.com has good search.
Yeah.
We gotten used to not having good searching and think it's acceptable. Look, most people use it for storing their code. Searching the code is a very basic thing, and we should not see this as some optional thing we're adding. It's basically a service that is down right now. We've gotten used to it because it's been down for so long, but we have like the normalization of deviance. I'm probably messing that up, but anyway, we shouldn't get used to this. We should fix this, and everyone bring their own cluster is not how to fix this. It should just work out of the box.
Yeah, and there's a whole range of other problems besides just code search. Like I find myself when I'm working on open source projects on GitHub, I use search for all sorts of different things, not just code search. I'm looking at issues to see if like a library is being used on another project and looking at their issues to see if someone's found a workaround. So really great global search is going to be critical if we want to actually be a place where people want to put their open source projects. Because one of the reasons you put them on a SaaS platform is that people can find them. So Kenny, I think you've got the next question.
Yeah, thanks, James. So I'll verbalize it. When there's a slide about server-side evaluation, is that going to take us into having kind of pipeline runs and tests run pre-commit while you're in the web IDE? You answered, but I'll let you verbalize it. Maybe I'd like to hear kind of how that plan, how we see that plan playing out.
Yeah, so the plan is to be able to run tests by like typing the command into the terminal, running the test command, whatever that is. There isn't a plan just yet to actually run the full suite of pipelines before committing it, because GitLab CI depends on having a commit to generate all those jobs. That would be a really interesting proposal, but and I know that there's people who've requested it. I've seen on the issue boards to be able to push a commit somewhere and have GitLab CI run the test before they actually push it into the merge request. So it seems pretty related to that problem. But to answer your question specifically about server-side evaluation, the goal is to have a runner with the development dependencies installed so that you can just run RSpec or whatever it is before you commit the way you would locally currently. So we're replicating the local development feel, not necessarily pushing CI into new territory.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, and this is going to be especially useful with linting tools, which we can then run on change when you touch certain files in the in that environment that is set up, that CI, well, that runner environment that's set up attached to the web IDE. Sid, do you want to verbalize your next question?
Yeah, what are we missing that GitHub has across Create?
I think one of the big things is the high availability of repositories. They've invested a lot of money in spokes, which means that their repositories are really robust, redundant, and fast, no matter where you are in the world. I think as part of that and the deduplication work that they did a few years ago, they've got really great forking workflows. They're fast, but not just the speed at which you do fork, but forking is really a first-class citizen there. And I think we have ways to go yet until we make our forking workflows as high quality as GitHub's. On the code review front, they do a really great job of assigning reviewers, which is slightly different to approvals. We've put a lot of effort into having great approval rules for policy and access control to prevent things merging without the right people reviewing it. But the actual process of assigning and allocating one of those approvers to do a review is something that we don't do well. We've got reviewer roulette in danger, and we really should work to make those a first-class feature the way GitHub has done with some of those features. I mean, there's the interesting recent things that they released yesterday. There's the sponsors feature, that's interesting. And there's also the dependency upgrades with Dependabot. I think it'll be interesting to work out where that would sit in terms of the stages of the DevOps lifecycle, but those automated resolution of dependency upgrades and security vulnerabilities, which sort of finally leads to an area that we're working on that they've just released, which is around confidential merge requests. So they're creating ephemeral forks for resolving security issues on. We've been looking at a similar approach, but with a long-lived private fork as sort of the first iteration. So, and one of the reasons for that is that having one ephemeral fork for each security issue doesn't necessarily solve the release problem, because you still need a stable branch that's secret. So even if you have the fix on an ephemeral fork, at some point you have to merge that into a release branch and actually deploy it. And if the only sort of main repo you have is the public one, it's difficult to actually merge it into a stable branch, do the QA, run your release process. So it might work for small open source libraries, which have a high degree of automation and their release process takes 30 seconds in a CI job. But for larger projects that release monthly, like GitLab, that workflow isn't sufficient on its own. So we're sort of, I guess, starting with a workflow that addresses the GitLab requirements of regular cadence of security releases where they sort of accumulate many fixes and then we release them together. But we'll need to mature and evolve our security release process with confidential merge requests to better accommodate smaller open source projects. And ephemeral forks is an important part in allowing non-project members or people that don't have access to that security fork with all the fixes in it. So a security researcher that contributes a report might want to do the fix, but in doing the fix, we shouldn't give them access to every other vulnerability report. So there's some interesting differences and approaches that we can work on there. Those are the ones that immediately come to mind. Oh, snippets. Thank you, Gabriel. You pointed that out. Our snippets are quite different to how GitHub has implemented gists. Ours have one support for a single file and are unversioned and stored in the database. We've got a lot of requests for treating them as Git repositories. But one of the big challenges we have to solve is that we have project snippets. And so if we were to treat personal snippets like individual projects and just store them in the project, the personal namespace for that user, there's quite an easy path forward to convert snippets into projects with a lightweight interface over the top and get all the features that gists have. Very hard to solve the problem of project snippets, where you'd have an arbitrary number of snippets inside of a single project. So that's a harder architectural change. Or we could just drop project snippets or something else. But that's sort of an area of evaluation. I think that's quite a few things that we've got to do.
Thanks for that.
I think this meeting's meant to stop at 25 past, and it's now 26 past by my clock. If there's any more questions, feel free to ask them in the Create Slack channel, and I'll do my best to answer them. And others in the Create team as well, like Dower and Andre, who isn't here. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, James.
everyone.
Thanks, Dower.